Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cracking Addiction. My name is Dr. Ferghal Armstrong, and we have with us Dr. Laura Petracek. So, Laura, I thought we'd dive into the sixth step of the 12-step process. What is the sixth step?
The sixth step is we were entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character.
So, again, we come up with this word God. Does it have to be God? Well, what is God in this context?
No, it doesn't have to be God. I mean, initially these steps were written 80 years ago based on the men who started were in a Christian-based religion.
Yeah.
And so God is, yes, unfortunately, all over the steps. But no, it could be a higher power. It could be the great outdoors. It could be nature. It could be a group of drunks, God.
Similarly to all the previous discussions we've had about how when we hear the word God in the 12 steps, it doesn't have to be a Christian God. It's simply
No,
that
it
higher
doesn't.
power.
Right. It doesn't have to be quote unquote God at all.
Yeah, yeah.
You don't have to mention God.
But we're asking an external force to remove our defects, aren't we?
We are, which is
That's
sometimes,
curious to me. Yeah, we've gone
yeah.
through all of this active processes of determining what these defects are and then confessing them to someone else and ourselves and God. And then we're asking God to get rid of them for us. I mean, I'm a bit confused. We've gone active, active, and then passive.
Right. Well, that's a very good point, Fergal, because it is a passive step in that regard. Just, there's no quote work that we're doing, there's no action steps. We're just kind of hoping against hope that a power greater than ourselves, if we ask, will remove our defects of character, which I think is a little naive thinking.
I agree. It also feeds into, I mean, given that this was written by Christian men in the 1920s, it feeds into the concept, or at least the Christian concept of salvation, doesn't it? Because, part of the key thing of the Christian faith is to ask God to forgive us our sins.
I
It's, it's,
mean,
it's
originally the steps were based on the Oxford group, which was a total Christian born again based group.
yeah,
And they had 6 steps instead of 12. And so the guys that started AA, Dr. Bob and Bill, just basically adopted those steps and just tweaked them a little bit. So you're right. It is like having, asking a power greater or confessing, please take these away.
yeah.
But it is Christian based. And unfortunately, it doesn't resonate with a lot of people.
For me, it absolves the person of the responsibility for working on their previously identified character defects.
Hmm.
What about you? What's your take on this?
Well, I agree. I think it does overall absolve the person from taking responsibility or being responsible for
Yeah,
removing their defects of character, or I like the word better, fault or shortcomings. It's not as pejorative.
yeah,
And so to do the work, like, okay, what am I going to do to change this shortcoming? Instead of just, please take this shortcoming away. I mean, it's almost like, please help me win the lottery. It's,
yes, it is.
yeah.
Yes, please let me win the lottery.
So
um,
this step does require work, even though the way it's written, it is very passive. That's a good point.
right. So, what work would you advise someone to undergo or undertake in the sixth step? in this modern time?
I would ask them if they're willing to change. A lot of people can admit their shortcomings, but sometimes we tend to like them. We're not really ready to give them up, or we're attached to our shortcomings in some way because there's a payoff. So
Yeah.
are they willing? Are you willing to change? And then the next thing is, what if you're hesitant or don't really feel like changing your shortcomings or working on them to change them? What are the obstacles in your way? Doing some motivational interviewing with yourself or having your sponsor ask you,
Mm.
like, what is your defenses or your obstacles to doing this step?
This goes back to the concept that the sponsor actually has a crucial role in these steps, and really needs to have a significant amount of insight and also a significant amount of skill, because we're using psychological tools to help people effectively through a cycle of change. And motivational interviewing is, it's not a tool that people are born with.
Well, it's not a tool that most people who are sponsors are aware of or have studied. So that is one of the many reasons I wrote my book, the DBT
Yeah,
Workbook for Alcohol and Drug Addiction, because I talk about in each step the psychological aspects.
yeah,
Because I'd say 80 90% of sponsors don't have any idea about the psychological background of these steps or how to approach someone. They're
yeah.
studied in AA. They're aware of the 12 steps and 12 traditions, but that's pretty much their purview. They're not
Yeah.
trained like we are.
There's another point I want to make about this step. And the step says we are entirely ready to have God remove all these defects. We are entirely ready. What's the importance of that phrase, entirely ready?
Um, like no holding back. A lot of times, like let's go back to the first step. A lot of folks have like one foot in the door. Like they're not entirely ready to give up drugs. Like, can I just have one little stash over here? Or can I just
Yeah,
have this one bottle of wine over there? So it's hard for someone, for human beings, I think, to entirely give up something. And
yeah,
so being entirely ready in this step is more the posture of it, is more the intent. Like, okay, no holds barred. I'm entirely ready. Like, let's do it. Let's go for it. I'm ready to give it up.
but again, going back to the principles of motivational interviewing and CBT, you don't need to be entirely ready for change to happen, do you?
No, you don't. And so that's some of the conflict between what we know today about addiction and the tools to help someone with their alcohol or drug addiction compared to 80 years ago when they had very limited tools or
Mm,
just the steps, but not the other tools that we have at our disposal to help
yeah.
someone who's struggling.
How would you rework or reword this sixth step if you were writing this book, if you were writing the book today? What would you say? What would be the themes in your sixth step?
We were willing to look at our faults and shortcomings and make a concerted effort to change them.
It's not as grandiose, is it? There's a lot of
No, it's not as grandiose, but I think it's more doable. I
yeah,
mean, I
it's
think
more
people are more.
mundane, dare I say.
Wait, what was that last part?
It's more mundane, dare I
Yes, yeah,
say.
it is. Um,
Yes, it doesn't have the pizzazz that the previous writing had, but I think it's more accessible.
no, it's more accessible. Yeah, it doesn't have the drama. That's true.
Yeah, Yeah.
It's not the all or nothing, as
Yeah.
Marsha Linehan would talk about. Yeah, it doesn't have that Academy Award in it, but still, it's accessible.
That takes away the accountability, or it takes away the agency of this higher power. It brings it to ourselves, doesn't it?
Yeah, it makes us
Yeah.
accountable
It makes us accountable.
instead of just, mea culpa, please take it. I mean, it
Yeah.
just doesn't
Yeah.
really work too much that way.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Right. So, talk to me about the process that people might go through. I mean, do you sit around discussing the sixth step and praying to God, asking for Him to take away your character defects? I mean, how does this work?
Well, that's a really good question because I was thrown, I was confused after doing the fifth step. What do you do now? And my sponsor referred me to this page in the big book, and there's like 2 sentences of the sixth step, meaning after you get home from doing the fifth step, you pray and you say, I'm entirely ready to have you remove all these defects of character. And then that's it. That's the sixth step. And it's 2 sentences. So it's a very vague and I just think a little confusing in that regard. Like, that's it. That's all
Mm.
I do. That seems like, I mean, the thing is, like you were saying, you don't, quote, do anything except say you're willing.
Right. And so you previously in previous episodes you talked about, fourth step groups. People get together, and you get together with a sponsor when you've done your fifth step. So this is a very solitary thing. There's no key societal or social milestone associated with this step.
Yeah, there's no group. There's no even really working with your sponsor like you did with the fourth and
Mm.
fifth step. It's just
Yeah.
you, the floor or the rug, and your higher power. That's
Right.
about it.
Okay.
Um,
Well, right.
yeah.
What about resistance? How would you overcome resistance to the sixth step? Or is it such an easy step that there really isn't any resistance?
Well, on the contrary, it's a really hard step because the way it's worded is we're entirely ready. So, like you're 100% in the game. And
Hmm.
it's hard, I think, for anyone to be all in, whatever is being asked of you. So to say, hey, I'm all in to have my defects of character removed, I think part of it is resistance and also some bargaining. Like, okay, you could take these shortcomings, but I don't really want to give up the one. Let's say you have an issue of always insisting that you're right. I don't really want to give that one up because, most of the time I am. So, so it's hard to really say, here, just take the whole kit and caboodle. No, there's
Yeah.
some shortcomings that we want to hang on to or we have a righteous feeling about that we
Yeah.
don't want to turn over. But yet the step is worded entirely ready.
And it really, the other point to make is that it's not just defects associated with substance use disorder. It's character defects, isn't it?
Yes, character defects. But again, I'm not a fan of that phrase. I like the word coming short of where you want to be,
Yeah.
um, changing your faults. But
Yeah.
defective character, sounds almost like you're a monster or something. It's just very pejorative. I don't like it. It's very negative.
Mm. So the
Uh,
people, I mean, if we go back to the idea of resistance and this concept that you're maybe not entirely ready, how long do people actually take to go through this sixth step compared to maybe the fourth or the fifth?
I mean, like I said, it's pretty much like a 1-2, You get home, you're supposed to get your knees on the floor, say this step, and ta-da! That's it. You're done. So it's a quickie.
You can say something without actually truly believing the meaning of the words. Do people stall on the sixth step? That's what I'm asking, I suppose.
Um, I think people do, and then they would probably go back to their sponsor and say, I realize I am not entirely ready, like the example I was giving before. Like I want to I'm not ready to let some of these shortcomings go.
So people, I mean, if you really are doing the work honestly, then it may be an opportunity to look at your internal resistance and understand the greater range of your character shortcomings rather than just the substance use.
Right. And that's where I feel more a therapist is more equipped to help someone look at their internal resistance.
So in previous episodes, we've always put the step that we're discussing in the context of the rest of the steps. So can you contextualize the sixth step for us?
So the sixth step is we're entirely ready to ask God to remove these shortcomings. And then the next step is, having God humbly ask God to remove them. So first, in the sixth step, we're becoming ready. We're entirely ready. And then the
Yeah.
seventh step, like you said, one step follows the other. As most things in life, steps, one follows the other.
Mm-hmm.
And the seventh step is, okay, now please remove them. And the first
Right.
step is like getting ready.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll be honest with you, when I memorized the 12 steps, for me, the key word for the sixth step is readiness. So does that change the way that we should consider the sixth step?
No, because it is about readiness. I would say
Yeah.
readiness and willingness.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
both of those key words.
And then we go into actually asking. So we're preparing and then we're asking in the seventh step. All right, Laura,
Exactly.
unfortunately, we've run out of time today, but thank you very much for your expertise. And I look forward to discussing with you the seventh step very shortly. Thank you. That's all for today, folks. My name is Dr. Ferghal Armstrong, and this has been Cracking Addiction.